Please put your hands together and join me in giving Mr. John Jackson a warm Georgia Tech welcome.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay, good. Mr. Patel, thank you so much for that very, very kind introduction. And that was very, very special of you. I appreciate that. Also, when I see my good friend Jim Arnett, who I need to call, Jim and I have been together a long, long time, and just a wonderful friend, so good to see you. Before I get into my introduction and my speech, and I'm going to talk, we'll have a conversation, tell you about my experience at Bank of Atlanta, starting Bank of Atlanta, and then open it up for questions because I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are. But before I get started, tomorrow at State Bank, I'm going to have some students come visit State Bank and Trust, and we've got something very special for them. And we're going to talk about teamwork there tomorrow. So Carrie, Alex, I didn't get you. Will you be there tomorrow? Yes. Will you be there tomorrow? The only way you can get in, and this is a ticket to my office. You see this? This is a dollar bill that's going zap. You got to bring this to me tomorrow and see what happens. You've got to bring this to me tomorrow and see what happens. Zap. You've got to bring this to me and see what happens. And you have to bring this to me tomorrow. I want my money tomorrow. You hear me? Yes. Okay. Oh, I got to go back in my wallet. I have a check for you. Carrie and Alex and you two that I haven't met, thank you so much for coming. You are going to help me through this, and I appreciate that. It truly is a pleasure. You know, usually I don't prepare. I don't write speeches down, and everybody told me, now listen, you went to the University of Georgia. Don't you go there and not be prepared or text. So I do have some notes here. But if I know myself, I probably will throw them away very shortly. But I do want to start by saying what a pleasure it is to be here with you this afternoon. I certainly would like to thank Dr. Bloom for allowing me this very special honor, this very special opportunity to spend time with a very distinguished group of individuals, all mind you that are young, intelligent, energetic, and committed to being the future leaders of this great country. You all saw and heard from Mr. Patel my bio, graduate of the University of Georgia. I must tell you, I grew up here in Atlanta, and I truly wanted to go to Georgia Tech. I really did. Nothing was more exciting than to see the Ramblin' Wreck roll on the field and all the fans cheering. And so I was excited about going to Georgia Tech until I got my less than impressive SAT scores. And so I ended up at the University of Georgia, which I'm very proud of that accomplishment. But I must say that it is so gratifying to be here at this institution. It really is. I got here early and walked around and looked at some of the names on the wall, and what the teamwork to put this thing together is so very, very special. And what Dr. Bloom is doing, you are to be commended for the foundation that you have created here to have a commitment to young minds, eager minds, committed minds. And so I certainly do applaud you for that. I was looking at a quote by John Quincy Adams, who was our 6th president, and he said, "If your actions inspire others to dream more, learn more, do more, and become more, you are a leader." And Dr. Bloom, these words certainly describe what's going on here. So once again, I do applaud you. Yes, I grew up in Atlanta. Loved my days at the University of Georgia. And now, if he was here, I would thank Professor Tate, and he was known as Casaday Tate then, and he taught business policy. And every business student at Georgia did not want to take the class because he didn't believe in giving A's. And so you would kind of avoid that class, but of course by your senior year you had to take it, and of course I took the class. It was an 8 o'clock class, and I worked from 4:30 in the morning to 7 o'clock at McDonald's, opening it up, getting ready to serve breakfast. I would leave McDonald's and then I would rush to the campus for my 8 o'clock class, and invariably every time I got there, I would have on my McDonald's shirt. And I had to sit in the front row. And, but for some reason, Professor Tate took a liking to me, and I have no earthly clue why. But he took a liking to me, and I did well on all of the cases that we submitted, that we worked on. And at the end of the year, when I finally looked at my grade, I knew I had an A, I had a B. But Professor Tate called me in his office, and he said, "John, I have certainly been impressed with you making every class on time. And I know you were coming from your job," but he said, "I think that you would be a great banker." Now, this was in 1976 that he told me that. And he took it a step further. He said, "I will send a letter of recommendation to one of my friends at a bank if you're interested. And again, I think it would be a rewarding career." He did that, and that was the beginning of my banking career. As Mr. Patel told you, I started at Bank of Atlanta on a management training program, and I worked there for 15 years. I started as a teller, and Carrie, you name it tomorrow, you'll see how we work as a teller tomorrow, but I started as a teller. And I worked in every different department at the bank. And over the 15-year period, I did a lot of things, a lot of different things. But the last 5 years, I managed a commercial region for commercial loans. And these were loans that we made to companies anywhere from $10,000 to $10 million. After the 15 years, I got a call from an individual who said, "SouthTrust Bank is coming to Atlanta. Therefore, this is an Alabama bank. And they're looking for someone who has that entrepreneurial spirit, who would like to come to a new bank and help them grow." And I had, after spending 15 years at the bank, having not worked anywhere else, making a decent salary, I said, "Why would I make this change now?" But when you're an entrepreneur, there's something inside of you to say, "Okay, make the change, make the switch." And I did. And I left Bank South, and I went to SouthTrust Bank. After 2 weeks there, I said, "I made a mistake." That entrepreneurial spirit in me was saying, "You shouldn't have done it. Go back, go back." The president of Bank South at the time, Pat Flynn, called my wife and said, "Is your husband happy at the bank?" And she said, "Well, he's a little bit confused. He doesn't know quite what to do. Have him call me." And I called him, and I said, "Mr. Flynn," I said, "I'm interested in coming back." And he said, "Okay, you call personnel the next day, and we'll work everything out." I went back to work. I called my boss and said, "Don," I said, "Listen, I made a mistake. I mean, I stepped out of my comfort zone, and I was not ready. I thought I was an entrepreneur. I thought I was a leader, but I was not ready. I want to go back." And Don said, "Well, I think you are making a mistake, but okay." I walked back to my office, and SouthTrust Bank is run by a man by the name of Wallace Malone. Those of you Googled him at some point, not now, but Google him. And you'll see he is one of the best bankers I've ever known, I've ever worked with, but he's a very demanding guy. And you think that I have a southern drawl, a southern accent, you should hear Wallace Malone. He would say, John. So he called me and he said, John, I had never met him, 2 weeks. He said, if you are planning to go back to Bank South, let me back up a minute. He said, if you are as good as they say you are, you should stay here and you won't regret it. And I felt good. Now he also said, John, on the other hand, if you are not as good as they say you are, you need to go back now. And he hung up the telephone. Okay? He threw down the gauntlet. And then that entrepreneurial spirit, that leadership in me said, hey, this is the place for me. This is the place because he wants somebody that's good. You hear a lot of good things about people, but they have to perform. And he threw down the gauntlet. I called Mr. Flynn back and said, Mr. Flynn, I made a mistake. I said, I'm going to stay here. Thank you so much. But I've got some unfinished business that I've got to do. And I spent the next 15 years at SouthTrust Bank. It was the best 15 years of my life in banking. I learned so much. So much there. I went from starting a division where we brought over customers, managing a portfolio that was close to $200 million. And eventually I went to Jacksonville. Wallace Malone called. We had a president in Florida who was sick. There was morale problems there. And Wallace Malone said, I want John Jackson to go there and protect the bank, improve the morale, make things right. And I did. And for 6 months, I thought I did a wonderful job. I thought we did a wonderful job. But what happened? While I was there, and Jim knows this, while I was there, SouthTrust was sold to Wachovia. And I said, well, I've done a good job. I know that Wachovia is going to offer me this job as president. But it didn't happen. They had someone there that was just as good or better. And they knew him, and he knew their system, and so they gave him the position. But they said, no, we want you to come back to Atlanta, and we want you to run a commercial division for us. And I said, okay, fine. But I got to thinking. So we talked about leadership. We've talked about that entrepreneurial spirit in me. And then one thing surfaced that you have to be careful of. And that's the ego. My ego surfaced and said, wait a minute. You've heard of golden parachute, where all the people up top, they get rewarded and move on. I was not in that group. And I felt slighted. I shouldn't have, but that little ego was telling me, oh, you should have been in that package. You should have been in that package. You need to leave. That ego, which is negative, and then that entrepreneurship, which is positive, said, don't worry about the ego. It is time for you to get out of that comfort level. You have been in banking for 30 years now. You've learned a lot. And now it's time for you to lead, to be the number one leader. It's time for you to embrace that entrepreneurial spirit and step out. I came back to Atlanta, and I had received a couple of calls several months earlier from a person that you probably sat in his room here, Steve Johnson conference room, I think you hear. Steve called me, and he said, John, he said, you know I've started several banks, and he said, I've gone to 3 people and asked them, if you were going to start a bank, who would it be with? And he said, my name was on everybody's list. And I said, Steve, that's funny because I went to a couple of people and asked if you were going to start a bank, who would it be with? And your name was on that list as well. So at that point, Steve Johnson and I formed a partnership. On December 7th, 2004, I walked into my boss's office. That entrepreneurial spirit said, walk proudly and do it. That ego saying, they didn't treat you right, do it. And then finally, I knocked that ego off my shoulder and said, this entrepreneurial spirit in me is going to lead. And I walked in and I resigned to my boss on December 7th, 2004. And shortly thereafter, we formed Bank of Atlanta. What do you do next? Okay, I'm out of a job. I don't have an office. I'm working out of my den. We formed, well, you got to raise money. You got to hire people. What do? Well, what you do is you seek wise counsel. And I had banked a friend of mine, a customer of mine, Herman Russell, H.J. Russell. I don't know if you're all familiar with him. If not, that's another name that you should Google. He passed away earlier this year. He owned the largest construction company, one of the largest construction companies in the United States, H.J. Russell Construction Company. And I'd banked him for 25 years. And I said, Mr. Russell, I need a little bit of your time. And I went to his office and I said, this is what I'm trying to do. I told you I'm going to raise $15 million and we're going to start a bank. It's a community bank. We're going to bank individuals, small companies with needs up to about $3 million. We can make this is a niche, this is an underserved market, and we can take advantage of it. And he looked at me and said, sit down, and we talked, and he started tapping on his desk, and I said, oh my. He said, here's some advice for you. He said, first of all, the obvious, hire talented people. Don't rush. Hire talented people who are not afraid to disagree with you. Secondly, remember when you hire these people, make sure you let them know that you care about them. And I'm reminded of the old expression, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. You future leaders, you remember that. And thirdly, he said, try your best to measure twice and cut once. And I thought more and more about that, and I said, okay, I understand that. And then he said, now, John, you told me you're going to raise $15 million to start a bank. And he said, the odds will be against you. And he said, I have followed your career for 25 years. That's why you banked me. And he said, but this advice I'll give you. He said, if you are going to start the bank with $15 million, don't do it. Okay? And I said, well, Mr. Russell, I've already resigned from the bank. And he said, no. And I went and I said, well, but Mr. Russell, at that time, you could start a bank. You could start a bank with $10 million. You could start a bank with $5 million. I said $15 million. And he sat back and he said, John, he said, the economy is good. It's robust right now. But in 2004, he said, it won't always be like this. And you are going to need 20, 25, 30, 40, and I sat back in the chair, $50 million to weather the storm, because when the economy slows, and it will, your odds are better if you have excess capital. And so I was somewhat disappointed a little bit, or confused a little bit, or ashamed a little bit, or nervous a little bit, because I had preached to my directors that we just needed to raise $15 million and we could take off. But you know, if you're going to go to wise counsel, you need to listen. And when they give you some advice, and they have experience, and they have a track record that says they are very good, you need to listen to them. And you know, that old thing, ego, was crawling up my back again and said, no, you've got your business plan, $15 million. And I knocked it off again. I said, no, wise counsel. I went back and said, we're going to raise $50 million just before we start this bank. And we did. We went back and said, okay, well, let's get moving. Let's start calling people and tell them what you need to do. But the first thing they said is, now, we have to put our money into it also, which we did. Because, you know, you have to have something you have to have some buy-in. You have to buy in, and buy-in comes in the form of cash, not necessarily experience, but we did. But we went out and we raised $60 million against all odds, because no one said we could do it. At the time, that was the largest capital raise for a community bank, and we did it when no one said we could. You all don't remember, but I flew in 2000, must have been 2005. I flew to London, England to raise some capital. As my plane landed, the bombs, that's when the bombs exploded on the train system there. Everything shut down. It took me, seems like 10 hours to get in the city. But you know what? I said, no, this is not going to stop us. You know, we'll stay here as long as we can to meet. But when I left London, I brought back a check for $5 million. You see, when I went there, which I later heard, the director said they thought it was a wasted trip, that we shouldn't spend that money because there's no one in London, England, that's going to invest $5 million in a community bank in Georgia, in Atlanta. But you know what? Against the odds, we made it, and they did. So we got the $60 million. We went in, we hired some good people, talented people, seasoned people, committed people, and we were off and running. We started. Loans began to materialize. Deposits, we were growing deposits. Things were looking good. So what do you think happened? I'm sorry, what happened in 2008? Mortgage, recession. In 2008, nearly 15 months after we opened, we went into a recession. This is the biggest recession since the 30s. What do we have? Jobs lost, foreclosure, business failures, bank failures. Did you know that Georgia and Florida had more banks to close, to fail, than any other state? Did you know that? We were right in the middle of it. Bank CEOs in a couple of states committed suicide. Suicide. Because of the pressure. The odds were mounting against us. Where would Bank of Atlanta, will Bank of Atlanta survive? You leaders and entrepreneurs, everything will not be rosy all the time. So be prepared. More bad news. More bad news. The economy continues to go south, further south. Salaries are being cut, which started at the CEO level. I took a 40% cut in pay. My executive staff took a cut in pay. But you know what? The non-officers did not take a cut in pay. It stayed at the top. So you leaders and entrepreneurs, remember that. When sacrifice has to be made, it starts with you. Now, all of a sudden, the regulators are attacking us. The Office of Thrift Supervision, they regulate banks. They come in and said, look at your past dues. Look at your problem assets. We are going to give you what is called a C&D, a cease and desist. That means that your bank is not performing well. And the odds say that you will not make it. You will be a number in the banks that will fail in Georgia. Now, by the way, I went to a meeting because we had to meet with them. They also said I was a terrible CEO. And they said, your president is terrible too. And that was me as well. So they got me in both times. But you know what? I had more bad news. But it's amazing when bad news, when it comes, how you have to take that bad news and make you stronger. So I said I had some more bad news. Just listen to this now. Okay, I've been told I'm a terrible CEO. We're under C&D. We're not going to make it. Foreclosures are up. My mother passes away. Okay. Now, granted, she was 96 years old, but she was a healthy 96 years old, and I wanted her to live to be 100. She was a mother of 8. And when things would go wrong, I could go to her and sit to her, and she had a 3rd grade education. 3rd grade, mind you. She was the smartest lady I ever met. I would go to her sometimes and say, Mama, I said, I've got a problem. I got this transaction, and I don't know what to do. And she would sit in the chair and rock. And invariably, she would just let me talk. And when I finished, and I would say, Mama, what do you think? And on this particular case, she said, son, you just need to be a man. You know, that's a powerful statement. On another occasion, she said, son, you just need to be still. So you see the impact. Even at 96, she had lived a long life. That was a very sad time for me. More bad news. My brother passes away unexpectedly. Okay? So what else could happen? Don't say what else could happen, because there was more bad news. Right in the midst of all of this, I get a call from my wife and say, you got to meet me at the doctor. We go to the doctor. My wife was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer. You know, I got 2 daughters. And I looked and I smiled. She smiled and she said, you know what? We're going to beat this. We've got a lot of chemo, we've got a lot of surgery, we've got a lot of radiation, but we're going to beat it. And I looked at her attitude in the midst of that bad news, and I said, hey, I got this bank thing done. I said, it's going to turn around, and against all odds, we are going to make it. And then I was reminded of a statement, a quote that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. made, and he said, the ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but rather where he stands during times of challenge and controversy. That was John Jackson. That was John Jackson. How are you going to take all of this bad news and make it positive? Nothing is more important than family. In the midst, I had to be at the office every day, but you know what? For 6 weeks, every Thursday, I left the office and didn't come back to go to my wife for chemotherapy before their chemo treatments, before they had surgery. Didn't miss it. But you know, the people at the office, we all teamed together. I hired good people, and we made it. We made it. And that was the beginning of something good. There is a, how do we do it? There is in banking, how they judge the quality of a bank. It's called a Camel's ratio. It's CAMEL. C is for capital, asset quality, management oversight, earnings, liquidity. We called a meeting. Say, okay, guys, this is what we have to do. We're going to improve in each one of these categories. The economy is bad, but we're not going to let the economy define us. Now, we had to do something now. We had this initial business plan that said, hey, we put hours and hours and hours. We had a Georgia Tech student working on it. We had an Emory student working on it. This is our business plan. But you know what? That business plan didn't work for the current environment. So we modified that. We created something else that would help us improve capital, improve asset quality, make sure we're managing correctly, make sure our earnings are there, and make sure our liquidity is there. Remember, cash is king. And in a bank, liquidity is very important. So what did we do? Okay. We did those critical success factors that we had to do is that we improved credit quality. Part of the business plan allowed us to make more money. We went into SBA lending. We went into mortgage lending, which we could do at the time. We took the fee income from the SBA lending, and we were able to move problem assets. We did it step by step by step. And what happened is our capital stopped eroding. Management was doing a good job. We were adhering to policy. We were inspecting everything. Our asset quality improved. And you know what? We started making profits. Our liquidity, we had deposits. Our liquidity ratio was very high. Good things were happening. And so all of a sudden, we said, you know, in spite of the odds, we can make it. We can make it. And so as the economy continued to improve, so did Bank of Atlanta. One other thing we did is that we created this thing called communication is very important. And in times of troubles, you have to make sure that you communicate even more. And we did that. But also what we did is that we made a choice that we were not going to let the regulators say bad things about us. We were going to go tell them all the bad things about us and tell them what we were doing to correct the bad things about us. And you know what? They became our friends. They began telling us some things that we could do. And day by day, month by month, things got better. This team, that my executive management team, the employees, we all rallied together. And you know what? Against all odds, we turned the corner. We turned the corner. A lot of banks were being acquired because they had to. Bank of Atlanta, we had a meeting. We had been profitable for 3 years. Our assets were a little over $200 million. And we made a decision to get to the next level, to create value for our shareholders, we need to be with a larger institution. And it was at that time that we made a decision to sell. We had 5, 6, 7 banks calling me, wanting to merge with us, wanted to buy us. We looked at State Bank and Trust, and the first time I met Joe Evans and Tom Wiley, I said, this is the bank that we want to team up with. And in October of last year, we finalized the acquisition. And you know what? 90% of the employees at Bank of Atlanta remains with State Bank. That says a lot about their culture, but it also says a lot about the culture, the people at Bank of Atlanta. When you talk about against the odds, raising $60 million, a bad economy, some of your best customers not paying you, you want to give up. But then something happens. You have something major. And usually it is not in the business sense. The business world is something personal, like your wife, like your mother, to make you stronger. And you know what? Because of that, because of taking those tragedies and just piling them up and stepping on them, making me higher and higher, we were able to overcome the odds, and we made it. And so today, Bank of Atlanta is now part of a $3 billion bank. And I have the opportunity to be a market president for a great institution that gives me the opportunity to come out and speak to such young, strong, intelligent minds like you to talk about my experience. And that for those of you that will be leaders and entrepreneurs, that you understand that yes, when you go out there and step outside of your comfort zone and do something, everything will not be perfect. But again, the measure of a man is how you react when things are not so good. I'll leave you with three things, three critical success factors that I absolutely embraced. And one is a sense of urgency. Don't procrastinate. When something has to be done, you do it then. Two, attention to detail. It is so important, so important. If you're not a good detailed person, then hire somebody who is. But you have to pay close attention to detail. And third, you have to instill confidence in those around you that you can do your job. I tell my daughters all the time, I have two daughters, and I said, don't let them see you sweat. And every day, at the worst time, I would walk into the bank and I had a smile on my face. Because that's one thing. I couldn't control the economy. I couldn't control if this guy spent all of his money. But one thing that I could and I can control is my attitude. And my attitude is, I'm going to be positive. I am going to be positive all the time because my style of leadership, being a servant leader, is that I serve you and I serve you with a smile. So against all odds, we at Bank of Atlanta made it. And people would say, if you had to do it again, you went through 7 years of working 7 days a week, basically. Would you do it again? And I say to them, absolutely, I would. Because you don't learn anything until you're challenged. You don't learn anything until you have to go ask somebody something. You don't learn anything without being pressed. And we certainly had a lot of pressure, but with a good group of people, the willing to listen, the having the ability not to worry about an ego, the ability to treat everything with a sense of urgency, we made it. And I hope that many of you, when you get into the world, the corporate world, or whatever you do, that you remember leadership is the key. Understanding people is the key. Hiring good people is the key. And caring for good people is the key. Thank you so much. I have time to take a few questions. Any questions, if you have any. Yes, sir.
Hello.
Hey.
First, thank you. That was amazing. So you mentioned that you need to instill confidence that you can do your job. So when you were faced with adversity in a more public situation, so when you were told that you weren't doing a good job as a president, or that you needed to raise more funds to establish Bank of Atlanta, what were the thoughts going through your head, and how did you keep yourself showing that confidence that yes, you can do it in those moments?
Thank you. That is a great question. And please, I am a praying man. And I prayed before I came into this auditorium here. And one of the things that coming up in a big family, being the youngest of 8, all boys and a girl, you have to constantly compete, and you always lose. You never could beat your brothers in anything. But they kept motivating me, said, it doesn't matter. Listen, because you lost, it doesn't define who you are. Because you're behind right now, it doesn't define who you are. And I promise you, I wouldn't let them define me. I wouldn't let them label me. I understand that I have weaknesses, but I work through my strengths. I really do. And so one of the things that you have to do, and part of a leader, is instilling confidence doesn't mean that you have to know all the answers. It means that you have to know where to go to get the answers, and you can tell them such. But one of the things that I did, and what's your name? I'm sorry.
I'm Lindsay.
Lindsay, that's a great question. One of the things that I did when this person, that's a true story. I was sitting in a smoke-filled room with regulators. There were 9 regulators, my CFO, myself, and my directors. And they told my directors, looked at me and said, you can't run this bank. And usually, I'm a very positive person. Now, I will respond. You can't label me. You can label me, but you're going to hear my response. And so then what I do is that if, in fact, they're telling the truth, you have to be fair to yourself. You have to be true to yourself. And remember what I said about hiring good people, having the people that won't just say yes to you? I had a group of people. If you ever hear the name Sheila Ray, she's awesome. She's the best CFO in the world. And she would come to me and she'll say, John, this is what we need to do. John, we got a weakness here. And I would listen to her. So we were prepared when we went in there, and I knew that they didn't know the full story. And so I felt confident, and I knew that we could. And let me add on to that question, because it's such a good question. When they told me that I could not lead this bank, our capital ratio was slightly over 8%. And that's how much cash you got with everything. The regulators require you to have a minimum cash requirement of 4%. But it takes a big drop to get from 8% to 4%. If you ever get to 2%, they will close your bank. We were far above 8%, and we knew that we were very transparent. We had some problem loans, rated a problem loan, because they didn't look good financially, but they paid every month. But we were very transparent. So the regulator said to me, because you can't run this bank, your bank will fail, and you need to raise $3 million. And usually when you raise money, you have to go pay an investment banker 6%, 7% to raise that money. They said, you can't pay that. And I looked at this guy, Paul. I'm going to tell you his name, Paul. And I said, Paul, we can raise $3 million, and we can do it in 30 days, and we don't have to have an investment banker. My CFO kicked me on my leg at the time. And I walked back. In 28 days, we raised $3.2 million. So the point is that we had a story that we knew we could deliver. But don't ever let them label you, is what I say.
Yes, sir. You spoke a lot on your success in the face of adversity. Would you be willing to share a story about a failure and how you grew from it?
A failure at the bank and what I did?
Sure, yeah.
Yeah. Is that right? Is that your question?
Yes. Yeah.
In bringing some people on, let's say hire good people. And I had worked with some people, and I had this guy that I want to bring in as a commercial lender. And one of the things, he lived on the in a different county, and he didn't want to drive into Atlanta. And what I did, against the advice, and sometimes you do make decisions that some people disagree with, but I made the decision to bring him on, and instead of having him come to our office on 17th and West Peachtree Street, I said, we'll set up a satellite office in Henry County. And that was a big mistake that I made, because I had to not only bring him on, I had to bring on an assistant, I had to pay rent, I had to do this, I had to do that. So it cost us a lot, and that was a mistake. But one thing that I did do, and this is so important from that was a terrible mistake, but in the midst of the crisis, I was the first to come and say, hey, I made a mistake, we're gonna close that office. And we did. And so yeah, that was one of the biggest mistakes I made as CEO of the bank. Yes.
Thank you
Hey.
for coming today.
Thank you so much.
So you spent a decent amount of time with Bank South and SouthTrust before Bank of Atlanta.
Yeah.
What would you say is the one most important thing that you learned from your time there that has helped you in Bank of Atlanta?
Great question. Teamwork. At Bank of Atlanta, at Bank South, coming out of the training program, I didn't know a whole lot. But I realized at a very early age that you can't do it by yourself. And when you find out that you don't know a whole lot, you've got to rely on other people. And what I found at Bank South and at SouthTrust, that they created a great environment of teamwork where you have to lean on that other person to be successful. At SouthTrust, for example, I worked with Mr. Arnett, and certainly I got into so many different situations that I had to call and lean on Jim to extricate me from problems. But that was the spirit of teamwork is what I was exposed to there, and that helped me so very, very much. And to move that question to another level, what I also learned at the other banks was that if ever I would lead a bank, I would be inclusive. I think that I would want everybody to own a piece of the pie. Because when Wachovia bought SouthTrust, there were a lot of employees that didn't benefit from that. And I thought that was wrong. It could have been $5,000, it could have been $1,000. That would make a difference. So when we did start Bank of Atlanta, one of the things that I did, and I'm so proud of this one, is that every employee of the bank owned stock in Bank of Atlanta. So when we eventually sold, every employee received something. And that's one of the reasons why we were successful, because we had buy-in. Let me tell you, when I say I'm a servant leader, I am. It's an inverted pyramid, and I serve. I'm a giver. You have givers and takers. I'm a giver. Some people are going to take more than they deserve, but I can't worry about that. But what I found in totality, if people know that, they'll cling together. And when the odds are against you, they'll stay with you. Works.
Jackson,
Yeah.
I really wanted to thank you for coming, and I really appreciated a lot about what you said about personal character and its importance in shaping a business. But I was wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing an example of maybe a difficult decision that you had to make and how your personal character and values shaped that decision.
Whew, you guys are so prepared. I told you that I went to a bank out of college. I went to Bank South management program and moved up. There was a person there, the senior credit officer at Bank South, who, again, he's a Georgia Tech guy, took great interest in me. And I don't know why. I hadn't, but took great interest in me when I was 22, 23 years old. And this lasted forever. When he went to SouthTrust before me. And he called me and said, why don't you come and start this division? And I did. Now here's the story. Here's the tough decision. When I started Bank of Atlanta, I went to him and I said, Mr. J, I need the best credit officer I can to run this bank. You make a lot of money. This is what I can pay you, but this is the upside. Will you come do it for me? And he said yes. And we had to do some things to make sure that he was taken care of, and he came on to the bank. So what happened in 2008, remember? The recession hit. We had made some decisions. Mr. J was now 70 years old. We couldn't afford his salary. He is one of my best friends. I went to every college basketball game his daughter played. When my wife was sick, he was right there when she had surgery. Close friend, but I had to go. The board came to me and said, we can't afford that salary. We're under a C&D. We can't do new loans. These SBA loans we can approve a different way. We need to save this salary. And I had to tell him that he was no longer needed at the bank. That was the toughest decision for me. But you know, when you're leading the bank, it is personal because you care about people, but you're mandated. It's your charge to do what is best for that bank. And so that was I went many sleepless nights, but it's something that I had to do.
Hi, thank you for giving the speech. I have a question about corporate culture. You said that at your time at Bank of Atlanta, there was a very strong culture there,
Yeah.
and that a lot of the people stayed on when State Bank came in to merge with you guys. As a leader in the company, what main values did you try to instill in the corporate culture there?
Integrity, honesty, commitment, passion, doing the right thing. I constantly go back to my father would tell me, son, just do the right thing. And those are the values. I tell everybody that you treat every customer, this is the culture, you treat every customer like you would want them to treat the mother. And you all know how I love my mother. And that's what we do. And you do it with a great attitude. That's the part that we had. Those are the things. And when you look at the core values of State Bank and the core values, treat everybody like a child of God. You don't usually say that in corporate missions, but we do. And we did it at Bank of Atlanta, and they did it at, and they do it at State Bank. And it was just tremendous synergy there.
Hi. You spoke some about important mentors in your life.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, besides Mr. Russell and some of the ones that you mentioned, who are the most important mentors, and how did you identify or seek them out?
Yeah. Being the youngest of 8, all boys, in an athletic family, their mission in life, my brother's mission in life was make sure that I did it right, that I didn't do, no one could come near me smoking a cigarette at the time, it's a long time. No one could come near me with any type of funny cigarette that they smoke. No one could bring alcohol. They wouldn't even let me date. And so they were my mentors. And one thing about that, and I'm going to get in a couple, one thing about that, no matter what situation I got in, whether or not I failed a class, go back to this character thing, whether or not I failed a class or did something stupid, I would always know that I had my mentors being my brothers to go back to. And then I could always remember the little things that my mother and father, as be still, be a man, do the right thing. Those are the things that motivated me. My father, and I'm a mentor, my father had a 6th grade education. He worked for 40 years as a porter for one of the largest law firms in the state of Georgia. At that time, it was Kilpatrick Cody, and as Townsend Kilpatrick. And if I said a porter to them, they would just smack me around because the attorneys there would say that my father was an ambassador there. My father was the type that if he walked into a courtroom and they had closed the door, and he would say, "Tell the judge Emerson is here," the judge would let him in. He was that type of man. And when my father passed away, if you go to Kilpatrick Townsend now on 14th Street, there's a bust of my father in their building because of what kind of man he was. So he was my mentor. And it all started in the home. But then outside, and I mentioned Mr. Russell, it was Arnold Johnson, who was a great mentor of mine, who taught me a lot of about banking. My minister was very significant in my life. What I try to do is that you think I'm positive now. I promise you, I'm this way every day. And I don't mean that in an egotistical manner, because when we opened the doors of Bank of Atlanta, I told everybody in there, I said, if you ever catch me, this was 11 years ago, in a bad mood, being negative to a customer, or negative to an employee, I'll give each employee $1,000. They never got that $1,000. That was because of the mentoring that I got from my family at an early age.
Oh, really? Okay. Sorry, students, I should give it to somebody else.
Yeah.
Can we have one more so I don't have to be last? Okay. Can you differentiate for us or compare a credit union to a community bank, to a really big bank in terms of their ability to serve their communities and their stakeholders, particularly with regard to debt capital for startups and small businesses?
Yeah. Really, when you raise capital, that allows you to how much risk you can take in loaning money out. For example, Bank of Atlanta had a $60 million, we raised $60 million. And the most that I could have the loan to a customer would be about $3 million. So what happens is that allows us to go to those small startup companies with revenues from a startup to 25 million, and we can take care of their needs. And so that's the community bank structures, that you have a small capital base, but what happens is you go after the smaller customers in the community that you can give them loans, you can get business loans, you can give them car loans, you can give them checking accounts. And so it allows you to do that. A credit union is restricted a little bit more in terms of what they can do because they have members that they actually serve. Credit unions are really more the mortgage type loans. They are limited also in terms of how much they can have exposed to one customer. Dr. Bloom talked about this big community, the big bank, State Bank, for example. We are almost $4 billion. We can have our house limit to any one customer is $80 million. You go to Bank of America and they can have their house limits whatever they want. But the main difference is, what is the focus? We're a relationship bank. Community banks and credit unions are relationship institutions. They're institutions that you get a chance to know them one-on-one. Doesn't mean the big banks are bad, they're not. But you have more one-on-one contact. It's not uncommon for you to pick up the bank, pick up the telephone and call a credit union, call a community bank, and you can get the president, you can get the CEO on the line, and they'll talk to you. Usually in the big banks, that won't happen. So the biggest difference is the complexity, the size of what they can and cannot do for you.
This isn't a question, but it's a comment. John probably doesn't remember, but before the Olympics came to Atlanta, the year before they came, our company got a interesting contract with the city of Atlanta, and we couldn't get money anywhere. He personally, and the bank he was at SouthTrust at the time, gave us a loan for $100,000. The guy who you see today is who he was in 1995.
I didn't see you. I didn't see you.
He was a joy to work with then. He's a great guy. I just wanted to make that comment.
Oh, wow, that is. You know what? I had eye surgery a couple of weeks ago, and I still can't see, but that is so nice of you to say. And that's who we are. Remember what I said, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Being a servant leader, yeah, there are pros and cons. They're all pros to me because I love connecting. You don't know how much I appreciate it getting here early, talking to people, finding out their stories, finding out who's a Green Bay Packers fan and who's not, and who's going to be a doctor and who's not. That is what banking is all about. And again, I'm telling you, I've got these 4 beautiful students coming to see me tomorrow, and we are so excited. My assistant came into my office, and she said, we're going to have these sandwiches here and sandwiches here. And then my other assistant came and said, no, they want the best pizza. That's what we're going to have, we're going to have. So the thing is, that's what we do, is try to create an environment that you have enough pressure at home, paying bills, doing that, so at work, we try to create an environment that, you can create some balance and it's okay to laugh.
I think we're going to close on that, John. So thanks for coming to Georgia Tech today.
Thank you so much.